Black organizations that have Black executive directors are usually underfunded, right? They are organizations that are not well supported, right? Or organizations that are not Black-led in Black communities led by white folks are well supported.
Well, a typical funder CBO relationship, a good one anyway, is a very relational relationship, meaning they know each other. They spend time getting to know each other and each other's work, their priorities, how their missions are aligned. But what typically happens with Black-led organizations is they don't have the kind of social connections that's needed in order to access philanthropy. And so with this particular initiative, the Black Equity Initiative, what was different and unique is that the funders actually had never funded systems change before. They'd never funded any of these organizations, so they didn't know them. They didn't have the relationships in the community that they needed. But what they knew they needed was somebody who did.
So my siblings and I have been working with Janice Minton Consulting, who've helped us kind of, administer, but also think through and come up with formats and frameworks for how we want to be philanthropic in the world and what we can do with the money that we had allocated to us to distribute. And when we decided to focus on the Black community, in particular, it started with the, violence against unarmed Black men. That was just kind of the trigger. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, these events that were happening, and that there was starting to become a movement. It's actually kind of like the first wave of the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. So we talked about that one day. There was sort of an open question from Janice Minton, like, is there something you want to do next? And my sister brought this up. And my brother and I also decided that this was something that we'd like to explore. And we organized some roundtables of different community leaders, primarily Black community leaders and people who work largely with the Black community. And really just kind of understanding what the needs are and where to go. And then what we realized is we needed, we didn't have the wisdom in our group on what we should do. We needed someone with expertise, and we really decided that we needed to work with a consultant, and it needed to be a Black consultant.
And so how the work began was what we call a process of discovery. We didn't start right away with a Black Equity Initiative. What we started with was a 4-month-long landscape analysis, which included interviews with 17 different leaders across philanthropy, community, academia, policy, really trying to unpack the root causes of why unarmed Black men were being killed. At the same time, we did things like literature reviews, where we wanted to read the research and really understand what had already been documented about this issue. For the funders, they really wanted to know, where could their dollars have the best leverage? Where could their dollars help to really advance impact, fill gaps, maybe do things that weren't already being done? And so they really wanted to go through a long process of discovery. What we also coupled into that process of discovery was we went and did site visits. So where there were organizations that were named either in the research or through our interviews with people, we were lucky enough to have 3 of those organizations here in Los Angeles. And so because they were here in Los Angeles, I went and did site visits. I really wanted to see their model in action. I wanted to be able to ask questions of not just the staff, but of the community that they were serving. I wanted to observe how they were working in community, what they were doing to actually be successful at their work. And so all of that together led to a report that I put together for the funder and said to them, well, here's what the research is telling us. If you really want to make a difference in this work, then it really is about systems change. That there are 3 issue areas that are really at the heart of the root causes, and that's education, workforce development, and criminal justice. And so when I took those findings back to them, they said, great, can you turn it into a grant program? And that became the Black Equity Initiative.
Before the Black Equity Initiative launched in 2017, we were really on the heels of a huge election, 2016, and a lot of our organizations understood what the change in the presidential election meant, what it meant for racial justice, what it meant for Black equity. We were sort of trying to build our own collective power and trying to do that really without the ability to really be focused and targeted around what Black communities needed. We knew what Black communities needed, but we couldn't really talk about it like that. We had to sort of hide and shield our work and hide it under this umbrella of people of color movements, and we knew that what was going on with Black people specifically needed our attention, but we didn't have resources to really focus on us. So when the Black Equity Initiative launched, you can imagine how incredibly excited we were to finally be able to live in our truth as Black-led organizations, to be able to center our campaigns and center our movement building work in the Black experience, and to do it at a time when really there was racial tension around Black life, and the need for us to do more about it.
I mean, the initial thought was, is this for real? Like, oh my God, thank God. I still to this day remember that first conversation with Casey, and I just couldn't believe the questions she was posing, the thoughtfulness that I was hearing she was expressing that the funders were having and what they were looking for, the process that they were going through of a comprehensive field scan. This was the first time we had the opportunity to talk about important partners of ours in this work. They're important to our whole ecosystem of making a difference, so we were able to refer other agencies that we felt were essential but weren't necessarily on the map. Just being able to speak frankly about the systemic racism we were seeing day in and day out in some of our school systems and our police departments that we partner with, that didn't have other channels to talk about that without this pressure of, oh, you can't talk about that. It sounds like you're calling them racist. It's like, well, let's look at the data. The data says there's a problem here. So, yeah, it was huge.
So we actually launched the initiative in 2017, in January of 2017. At the time, they were the only funder in all of California that was focused specifically on the Black community.
Black-led organizations need money, but we also wanted to be in a relationship with a funder who understood us and understood what we needed as organizations, understood what the hurdle was to actually building our work in a way that was centered around our needs. And certainly Casey was that bridge, I think, for us between the organizations and the funder, and it's been a really beautiful relationship.
I'm always sort of cynical about those arrangements, and without a trusted messenger like Casey, I don't believe, and this is speaking for me, but I think the same could be said for many of the other participants, that folks would be willing to go as deep as we went, willing to give as much as we gave, right? And because we understood that the offerings that we were giving was an offering for generations to come. And so the trusted messenger was important, was more important than the resource that was provided.
I often say this to funders: when you're talking about communities of color, in general, but Black people specifically, it's not just the work that we do, but it's how we do the work. How we show up in community is as important as the work we're doing in community itself. We understand that there is harm being committed at a structural and systemic level, and we need to strategically disrupt that harm. And we understand that none of this exists without deep love for ourselves and love for our communities. And it was those kinds of conversations that really started to shift some of the thinking of funders in the room that day. And it was that day in that room where the very first seed for the Black Equity Collective was planted.
In the role of a philanthropist, I don't even want to call myself a philanthropist, but sometimes I'm in that role, and others are too. Like it's a big responsibility. And you really want to feel like your dollars that you're giving away, which are finite ultimately, are that you're having as much of an impact as possible. And I can say that this funding the Black Equity Initiative for the last few years, being part of that, has been definitely feels like the most effective use of our funds possible. And I think that other funders, if they're looking to have impact, should find out more, should join this effort of the Black Equity Collective.
It is our hope that Black-led organizations and the Black community is not a project. It is not a project that you can give a 1 or 2 year grant, walk away, brush your hands and say, we did our job. We are hopeful that when you get this entire sort of horizon of values and guidance, that you understand the investment is long-term and we're not looking for a paternalistic relationship, that we're looking for a partnership that's rooted in truth, and that there will be no need to not say things, right? Because oftentimes organizations are like, oh boy, I better not say that. We might get in trouble, right? But as John Lewis said, we should be bold about the good trouble. And philanthropy, hopefully, will embrace that.
Just before we received funding and support from the Black Equity Initiative, we had been working on a special initiative in San Bernardino City Unified School District, and that was the African American Learners Initiative. And it happened through a department that had very little resources, less than $1 million dedicated to supporting the needs of African American students. We knew that it wasn't enough, but we knew that there was an opportunity to leverage additional resources. And so we used our organizing power and our relationships with the school board to work with them to actually increase that budget substantially, from under $1 million to $6.3 million, which really solidified the department's ability to really take the program to scale, to serve more students, to begin to pilot programs that they would not have otherwise piloted, and to really see community-based organizations and Black-led community-based organizations as partners in increasing and improving academic outcomes for Black students. This was a huge victory, and it's something that could not have happened again if we did not have sustained support, if we didn't have the freedom to go into a district and say, we need to put our money where our mouth is and actually invest in equity and make sure that the needs of Black children could be realized and planned for in their district budgets. This became a model and a lot of our statewide partners started to look to San Bernardino City Unified School District because it was doing something pioneering and actually calling out Black students and writing Black students into their budgets and their plans. And we're really grateful. We're still continuing to monitor that work. This is work that's for the long haul.
So the investment from the JIB Fund in the organizations was very significant. And I cannot state this enough, that investing in their work to do the work of Black equity, to pursue equity and justice for Black people, meant that they could take that message to other funders. And as a result, their organizational budgets dramatically increased. From the time of the first grant that was awarded in 2017 to the time the last grant was awarded in 2019, because it was a 2-year grant, the organizations overall had increased their organizational budgets by more than $10 million between the 15 organizations. And for the Black-led organizations, when we looked at the average, it was almost $750,000 on average that the Black-led organizations had their budgets increased in that 2-year period.
I'm thrilled that this has kind of catapulted into the Black Equity Collective for a few reasons. I think that, first of all, lots of other funders are now coming together to support this work, but also there's more independence, that the collective itself is not reliant on one funder, is not reliant on having to sort of bend to a certain framework or whatever, but that they get to figure out for themselves what's important, because it is ultimately the communities themselves that are going to come up with the solutions. It's not the funders, and the funders just have to figure out ways to trust. And I think that there's a lot of brilliant people most of the people involved in the collective, if not all, have already been working together for several years, have built trust, have built sort of a way of working and a way of thinking about the landscape that is priceless.
When you bring people together, when you convene people, when you give folks the space to just breathe, to just think, to just build, amazing things will happen.